Hi, folks, with Tassless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio, audio, no pictures live stream. Please listen to this in your car as you're driving along, or your truck, or put in your earbuds in public transport. I've had a few people actually send me messages saying, look, they don't want to use earbuds. They want to be able to walk around in a busy street or around the place and just have an open, en clair, have an open sort of sound thing, and they want the volume to be high enough to do that. I say, no, you listen to it in your home where it's somewhat quiet, or again, put the earbuds in or in your car. That's how I've made this. It's to listen to it under those circumstances, not to try and listen to it in the middle of a busy, bustling sort of situation. Anyway, having said that, in this essay, I'd like to talk about the sort of penalties that are given out to climate protesters or other protesters. It could be the Palestine protesters and the two-tier policing that's used there. Why are some protesters that cause a lot of harm and damage, BLM, climate, and so on, why are they treated very leniently, whereas others, the far right, Hitler and Nazis, they're treated, January 6th, insurrection, Hitler, they're treated with brutality, and the rule of law and due legal process and constitutional rights, the writ of habeas corpus. That doesn't mean jack shit if you're on the wrong side of the political debate. But the reality is that the BLM and the climate change, all these sort of people, they're really the foot soldiers of the globalist cabal, which is why they're treated very leniently. But how leniently sort of really took me by surprise, because if you look at the numbers that the various, say, climate protester groups in Britain, as a case in point, the numbers they claim they can get out onto the streets for protests, tens of thousands. In some cases, they're claiming hundreds of thousands. And yet they're saying somewhere in the order of only 1 in 1,000 of their protesters are getting arrested by the authorities. I mean, can that be right? 1 in 1,000? I mean, others say it's really, closer to 1 in 100. Some say 1 in 150. Now, there's a hard nucleus of professional, paid-up agitator activists, and then there's the flunkies that sort of go along for the ride, where people are at these protests waving placards. They've got no idea what they're protesting. Oh, we have to be in support of marginalised communities, and they turn up not even knowing what community has been marginalised or how, or what the purpose of the march is. So they've just got some very low IQ, gender studies type understanding of the world, and these are people, of course, that would have never have gone to university years ago, but there is a shitload of people with an IQ of 80, and they form up now the majority of the kids at university. No one could have foreseen or imagined that, but they're a very easily accessible class of placard wavers that can be whistled up on demand. Let's assume it's somewhere between 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 gets arrested. It's still incredibly low odds. I mean, wow, that is like really low. So I'll use 1 in 100 just as a reference point. So only 1 in 100 is getting arrested. Now remember the lenient treatment these people get. They're repeatedly asked to move out the way, so they're blocking a road. So repeatedly asked by the police. So they've broken a law or series of laws already. They're refusing a reasonable police, a legal police order there, and another crime. Then the police try and arrest them. They resist arrest, another crime, and so on. So this is already something that you'd say, well, hey, a custodial sentence would be appropriate at this stage, particularly if it's a repeat offender, which it often is. Yet that's not what happens. So just looking at in Britain over the last 2 years, if I've understood the numbers correctly, over the last 2 years, and given the very intense climate activism and the vandalism and so on and so forth, something like 150 people were arrested. Now you say, well, 150 people arrested, well, surely that would send a message. Well, no, because nearly all of those people were released either later that day or the next day, most of them later that day. So they're really just being moved away from the area, if you like, or moved away from that specific protest. and then they're being released, later on that afternoon, without charge and without anything at all. Well, why? Well, why are they not being charged? Well, why are they being released? Now, clearly, it's a political decision. It's not illegal. They've already broken a number of laws, and the police could take action. So the Department of Prosecutions is very clearly telling the police, look, don't worry about it. Just let them go. We're not interested in it. So, and that's a political decision at that level. The same people that'll go after, there was a guy in England who was putting out stickers saying it's okay to be white. He gets 2 years in prison. He hasn't disrupted or stopped anybody. He hasn't caused any mayhem. He hasn't whistled up some sort of group of activists to block roads and to vandalize buildings and so on. He hasn't done any of that, but he gets 2 years in prison. His house gets raided and they supposedly find swastikas. Yeah, sure they did. So why aren't they raiding the houses of these climate activists? But they're not. Why are they not putting them in prison? And why is the Department of Public Prosecutions that's so absolutely keen and eager? They're gagging to go after this guy, saying it's okay to be white, but they're just not in. Let them go. Let them go. I don't think the police are necessarily happy about this, but that's what they're told. The Department of Prosecution, we're not interested. We're not interested in prosecuting it. So that's it. So they go. Now, in the case, there are four people that actually suffered or were given jail time, and it was approximately 3 months apiece. All of these were repeat offenders, as in multiple repeat offenders, and who've been in the court before, and they've got after the third time they got a good behaviour bond, and then on the fourth time they then did some jail time. But it's 3 months. Now, from that 3 months, if they've been, whatever time they've been detained for already, like as in pre-trial detention, that's deducted off the 3 months. Then they're given a good behaviour and non-parole. So the real amount of time they spend in prison is about 5 weeks. So they get 5 weeks, whereas the guy saying it's okay to be white gets 2 years in prison. Now, I've talked to about two-tier policing. It was a recent case, and I won't mention the jurisdiction, but where a guy was digitally altering photographs and putting the heads of women that he knew or knew of onto naked women's pictures and then putting it on a porn website. And okay, should the guy have been punished? I'm sure, getting fired from his job because some of these women were patrons at the business he was at, they worked at. Should have been fired. Should he have maybe even got a good behaviour bond? Look, don't do it again, buddy. I mean, seriously. Should he got sure he got nine fucking years in prison for that. But you can disrupt a whole city and have the traffic in gridlock for 6, 7, 8 hours as activists. But you get a $50 fine. So we're looking at this two-tier. So I was quite surprised that there's not one, as I understand at least, there is not one alleged climate protester, whether it's vandalism, whether it's whatever they've done, it doesn't matter, the harm they've caused, preventing doctors from getting to the hospital for life-saving operations and the patients die and this sort of thing. There's nothing they get. None of them have done serious prison time. None of them have done more than a few weeks in prison. And the ones that have done a few weeks in prison are less than 1% of the protesters that are out spreading this mayhem. And it's premeditated mayhem. Many times they don't have the police permit or the authority to do it. They just do it. And yet somehow nothing's done. The same could be said for the Palestinian protests and other so-called protests in support of oppressed minority groups and this sort of thing. But you try. I was watching one of the COVID protests when they were closing down businesses, and there were a lot of people with very legitimate protests, by the way. The protest was that how can you prove that the lockdown benefits, saves or protects anybody? And if you haven't got the facts on your side, why are you closing my business down without some sort of input, like, well, why aren't we having a referendum, or why aren't we having some sort of process here? So very legitimate complaints. They weren't violent or anything like this, and the police response was brutal. There were special military attack squads that were going into the crowd to try and find protest leaders, to try and spot them, and then go in and grab them out of the crowd and throw them in there. And they were getting prison time and so on. And also the writ of habeas corpus was just arbitrarily suspended by government fiat. So the government can come down hard on these BLM and Antifa, climate change. They can come down hard on it if they want to. But for some reason, politically, well, not for some reason, they're the globalist foot soldiers. They're meant to be disrupting and undermining and destroying and fucking up the fabric of the social and economic and political fabric of the West, destroying its institutions. That's what they're there to do, and so they have to be allowed to get on with it by the globalist controlled government, and that's why the Department of Prosecutions just shows no interest in going after them. And again, the amount of the repeat offenders, 4 acts of vandalism, flagrant and blatant vandalism, before someone gets any prison time, and then they only get 5 weeks in the end in prison. I mean, you're kidding me, right? Anyone else would have got years in prison, but these people don't. And we just need to really understand how these climate protesters are not climate protesters; they're employees of the globalist cabal. And their job is to undermine the very fabric of Western society. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.